Looks like a pretty bad hair day for me today. Checking it out here. So from certain angles it doesn't look that bad actually. See if I had recorded this angle. This is not bad. But then this angle is the one I tend to use. This angle. This is not good. Look how many things people have to learn in Hollywood to make a movie. You know, it's really a difficult thing to make a film. To make someone, sometimes you're trying to make someone look bad. So if you're making a film, then you might put them at that angle. And then if you're trying to make them look a little better, you might show them talking to somebody kind of at more like that angle or something like that. You know, so if you got a problem, for example, from below, you notice that the nose has a little bit of curve to it because I once had a nasoseptoplasty, and that kind of made the nose a little bit crooked. So, but look, if you go a little bit head on like that, it's not as bad. So, you know, as a correction, some of my previous views, I should put on record that, like a friend of mine once said, I thought it was pretty admirable that she could say that. She was like, well, my husband died, but he was 39, as a friend of mine, Stan. She's like, but I'm not too bad of a looking girl, so I think I'll probably be with some other guy again. She was right. She was going to be with some other guy again. She didn't have it wrong. I'm wondering what generosity is at this point. Like, why? What is it that makes us generous? Question of what is being generous to someone? What do I have to do to be considered to be a generous person? See, I was just discussing with a friend of mine that I once rolled dice with another friend of mine named Conrad, and while I was in college a number of years ago, and I could not lose a roll that evening, so I took all his money. He had about $380 or $360, and I took every bit in about 20 rolls. He couldn't win a single roll, but he was the kind of guy who, he told me, you can't have that money because I was going to get a bike with that. And see, if he had been rolling against a friend of mine, one of his friends, my friend John would have not told John that. He would have just accepted that he lost that bet and that he lost that money. But with me, because he knew I was the kind of guy who would feel sympathy or generosity, he decided to tell me that he had set that money aside for a bike. And I gave him the money back because I was like, I don't want the guy to hate me because he didn't get his bike. And I consider that generous. You know, I could have taken his money. It was mine. You know, but I didn't take his money. So I consider that generous. But I don't know how to define generosity. I just know that that was an act of generosity. So I'm not sure what would make us generous, or what would make us more generous. And spirit of generosity. Leo Strauss raises this question in another of his very good writings, in replies to Schar and Wolin, on their responses to an essay that he wrote, an epilogue, in the Essays in Scientific Study of Politics. And so there he raises the issue of generosity of spirit. What is generosity of spirit? And the generosity of spirit in Schar and Wolin would have been those who cannot but sorrow for the lot of humanity, versus those who do not elevate the sorrow for the lot of humanity to a principle. That would have been Strauss and his philosophy. Strauss reveals an enormous amount in Natural Right and History about his philosophy and his philosophical principles when he when he poses two different ethics that are in a way derivative from the thinking of Max Weber, and he says that there's an ethics whereby those who are capable of much are elevated to a greater status because they're capable of much. That's one ethic. And then there's an alternative ethic where if you are capable of much, a great deal is expected of you. So he poses the fundamental axiological, moral fulcrum of his entire thinking on the basis of this issue. Either that some are capable of a great deal means that a great deal is expected of them, which means you hold them to the highest standard, and if they fall beneath it, you punish them for it. Or you see in some great potential, and then you put together talent on that basis, building up that talent. See? And this was just the issue between Leo Strauss's ideas and those of Dr. King. Because Dr. King's idea was you take your eyes and you look everywhere you can in society, and you find those talents and you unite them together so they can build up. And Strauss was saying you look everywhere you can in society and you make sure that those talents have the hardest time to unite. And you'll get, what you'll get will actually be better because you made them struggle that hard. So they're two totally different ethical positions. They have nothing to do with one another. So in this idea of Strauss's, if people are talented and they have talents, say if I have a talent for doing philosophical speculation or philosophical thinking or artistic thinking, if I'm a sculptor, for instance, and I'm good at sculpting, I don't get the list of every other great sculptor so we can have a big meeting on Saturday nights and combine our talents. Maybe I don't get that list. So I have to work at my craft. And I have to work at making my craft the best I can make it out of my own self. And I think this is the difference, in a sense, between Strauss's anti-socialist philosophy, or neutral to socialism, and then the philosophy of Dr. King, which was a pro-socialist philosophy. See, Dr. King met a guy who was down on his luck, and the guy, he hadn't had a date in a long time, and he didn't have anybody that really liked him. Dr. King would have said, what can I do to help you out? Generosity. Spirit of generosity. This is raised in the replies of Schar and wolin, because Schar and wolin said, we are of the opinion that we sorrow. We cannot but sorrow for the lot of humanity and the pain of humanity. And Dr. King was of that camp. He was like, I'm in that camp because I have pain in my heart that people have to live with privations. And Strauss was saying, well, that's the way it is. And if we don't expect a lot, then we're not going to have a society where you can get the best plastic surgeon in the world in Beverly Hills. You know, you're not going to get that nip tuck that you want that's perfect, because we never forced those people to be that way. So Strauss's idea was that socialism causes people to accept less than they would otherwise, because you can go to that meeting with all those sculptors and then you kind of you relax and you take it easy on your own art, because you're like, hey, that guy's doing it, that woman's doing it, that woman's doing it, that guy's doing it, so I don't have to work as hard at my craft. And this is the issue, between Strauss's way. Strauss is saying in the Nietzsche Note on the Plan of Beyond Good and Evil essay that great suffering brings about great accomplishment. And it requires that suffering, requires that kind of suffering of individuals in order to create something great. And I don't know where I stand on this issue. I think I stand by inclination with the Dr. King idea, but more of a synthesis of that, see? But I maybe, Strauss is convinced, and he says it in Nietzsche, Note on the Plan, he says that without that suffering on the part of people, and without somebody else reaching out for them, they will become something greater. The individual will be better served. The collective, in my view, that's Schar and Wolin saying, we cannot but sorrow for the collective of humanity that cannot then be lifted, because their being lifted requires their own effort. And that's one of the most important philosophical issues that Strauss ever raised, and it was the only time where he revealed the integuments of his axiological or moral position. And if you read Natural Right and History several times, but you didn't see that, then you didn't see that he was posing one of the most important moral dichotomies in all of his thinking in the Max Weber essay.